We are of three, and so our grocery bills are quite high. My husband works at a tech company, and I currently stay at home raising the kids, who are 10, 7, and 3. I go food shopping at least twice a week, and I usually go to the King Colon near our house, though I sometimes go to the nearby Target as well. Those are two of a very small list of grocery stores in our quiet town. To give as much context as possible, we're an Italian family and I'm currently 40 years old. This happened not even a year ago when I was 39. I was running behind on shopping one day, so I went much later than usual. The King Colon bias closes at 10 and it was definitely past 9 o'clock already, so I hurried over to the store with my flyers and coupons. The kids were complaining about a lack of food in the house, so I had to get a quick grocery run in. Most days I'd have to go shopping with my 3-year-old daughter Haley since it was late and my husband was home from work at this time. For once I was able and apologized for startling me and said that he'd been looking everywhere for a specific bag of chips that was in my cart, and he asked where I found them. I politely told him the aisle, and he said he checked but couldn't find it, so I actually led him exactly to where I found the chips. He thanked me with his awful breath, and I smiled and was about to walk back to my cart, but then he started making pointless conversation with me about why he liked those chips so much. Something silly like the ingredients or a lack of a specific ingredient. I kept trying to make it obvious that I was inching my way back to my cart. He wouldn't get the hint, though. It was when he made a weird pause and then said, "Gosh, you're pretty." That I said thank you, and then I had to get back to my shopping before they close. I went to my cart, but he followed me and kept talking to me. At this point, as politely as I could, I told him I really would just like to shop in peace. He all seemed to get the hint and walked away, but for the rest of my time in the store that night I kept seeing that man circling the aisles, and each time he walked past the aisle I was in, he'd slow down or even stop and just look down at me. I was getting increasingly uncomfortable and hurried up my shopping. When I was finally done, I went to the checkout, and as I emptied my cart, here comes red hoodie guy with a whole 2 or 3 items, and he waits online right behind me. He doesn't say a word anymore, but I felt his gaze even through the back of my head. I was done checking out. I pushed my card away and the man called out, "Have a good night, ma'am," and I ignored it. As I was unloading my car, I noticed the red hoodie guy in the parking lot looking at me as he walked to his car. He got into a junky looking Honda that must have been like 30 years old. He didn't turn the car on, though. He just sat in it. I finally finished loading my car, so I got inside, started it, and began driving out of the parking lot. I looked in my rearview mirror a few times and I didn't see any headlights behind me, so I felt safe to drive home. It wasn't until I pulled into the driveway and looked to my left down the street that I realized there was a car with its headlights off driving slowly down the street approaching our house. He pulled to the curb a few houses down, looked to be that Honda from the parking lot. I went inside the house and called my husband's name. He came downstairs looking concerned, and I told him I was followed home by a creep. He hurried outside to the stoop, but by this time the car was already gone. The following weekend, late at night, when we were all in bed, we heard some shuffling around outside in the side yard. I shook my husband to go check what it was, and he went to slide the window open. He saw someone right below the window trying to open the side gates, the backyard, but after hearing the window slide open, the man looked up and started to run. My husband grabbed the baseball bat from under the bed and ran outside, and when he came back a minute later, he said he saw the car speeding down the street and he tried to chase after it. Perfectly described the shitty Honda that the red hoodie guy was driving. It was undoubtedly him. We phoned the police, and given the late hour, a police officer arrived to our house in under 5 minutes. I described the man and his car the best I could, and that was that he never returned to our house, not after seeing my angry husband chasing his car on foot with a bat. Still remains uncomfortable that a creep like that knows where I live though. Music. When I was in college I worked at Wall. Bounds. The one I worked at was a 24-hour one, so a couple unfortunate people would always be stuck working that awful shift. I thought since I was 20 and in college that my boss would never put me on an overnight shift, but unfortunately I guess when she has my school schedule, and I told her I was off Mondays and Wednesdays, she saw me as a perfect sucker to stick on the overnight shift. Occasionally moving forward, one day I saw that I was scheduled for a Tuesday night from 12 a.m. to 8 a.m. I had to triple check the schedule to make sure that that was right. I felt sick seeing that, and when I asked my supervisor why I was put on the overnight shift, he told me if I'm over 18 I don't really have a choice. I considered quitting, but I needed the job and money, so I just sucked it up and decided I'd do it this one time and then tell my boss I can't do it ever again because I have to study for school. So I arrived at the store at 12 o'clock and relieved my coworker Amanda half. The lights in the store were out at this hour to save on electricity. There were surprising amount of customers in the store when I got there. I guess more people than I expected would do quick midnight shopping runs. Past 1 a.m. though the place was completely dead, maybe 3 customers in the entire hour. As it got later in the night there were less and less customers. It was past 2 a.m. by this point. I was as bored as humanly possible and there hadn't been a customer in over an hour. I wondered if there were any other employees in the building. There had to be. I figured they couldn't have a lone 20-year-old running the whole place by himself. There was some bald guy who looked like he could be a manager that kept passing by the front registers every few minutes. He had a key ring attached to his khakis with like 10 keys on it, and he was holding a small backpack type bag in his hand. So I said, "Excuse me, are you the manager?" And he came over and asked if it was my first day on the job, to which I said it was my first night shift. He shook my hand without giving me his name and asked me if I could go to the back warehouse of the store and organize the pallets. He said he'd watch the front. I didn't exactly know what that meant, but I'd figure it out. I walked towards the back of the store, and as I did I saw him doing something to the entrance door of the store, like he was reaching for some switch on the side of it as if he were locking it. I made my way into the back warehouse, where I saw a tall man who looked like he were 30 wearing a manager's vest that said Wall Bounce. He saw my apron and introduced himself as Rob, the night manager. I said, "Oh, I thought the guy in the front was the night manager," and he looked puzzled and said who. When I described that man from before, he asked me to show him who I was talking about because he was the only manager on duty. We didn't even make it out of the warehouse before all the lights in the store turned off. Rob told me to wait in the warehouse while he checks out what's going on. I watched as he walked through the warehouse doors into the darkness of the store, with the only light out there being from the lights of the dairy coolers that were still on. I sat on a box on the pallet and was on my phone trying to text any of my friends who could have been awake about what was happening when I heard a door from inside the warehouse opening. Was on the other side of the warehouse, separated by the freezer and dairy fridge.